Oh, God. Where does he find these?
Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
I'm Dr. Kimberly Huang. I am a bioarchaeologist. I study the human skeleton, health and disease, and evolution.
And I'm Dr. Ross Barnett, a paleogeneticist looking at Ice Age cats.
And before we get into our movie today, I have a small announcement for us. We have a winner for our contest where you're supposed to send in your errors or mistakes that we made or things that we missed in our movies.
Yeah.
From our good friend Duncan in Calgary. I think he's in Calgary. So the contest was, I had a small run of T-shirts and hoodies printed up, or somebody had them printed up for me as a gift. And we decided we would give some of them away. And to win one, you would have to send in an error that we made in a podcast episode or something in the movie that was an error that we missed, that we didn't talk about. And I'm putting this up front because we always do it at the end, and we have had a pretty slow response to it, so I'm wondering if people don't listen all the way to the end, and a lot of people may not know about it. But also, if you listen to this podcast, you are, one of a very small number of people that listen to this podcast, so... probably a good idea to put some stuff up front so that everybody catches everything that we have to say. So Duncan contested what I said about the Trans-Canada Highway. Basically the idea that the Trans-Canada Highway is a single highway that goes all the way across Canada. And it does go all the way across Canada, but I'll just read exactly what he says. He says, "I will fight you on the quote-unquote fact that the Trans-Canada Highway actually goes across all of Canada. Specifically, as you approach the Ontario border from Winnipeg, the TCH devolves and becomes a loose collection of byways that porpoises from 80 down to 50 between every goddamn town until you get to Sudbury, and then it just simply shits the bed until Ottawa."
Okay, fair.
Yeah, fair enough. And so the Trans-Canada Highway isn't actually one highway. It is sort of a loose collection of highways, and there's really no standards to it. So... Fair enough. I sent him a hoodie for that, which hopefully will have arrived by the time he hears this episode.
Yay. Thanks, Duncan.
Yeah, thanks again, Duncan. Duncan, by the way, emailed us before about the Egyptian mummy at the University of Calgary.
Right.
So we've heard from him before.
Yeah.
He also suggested that Saskatchewan isn't quite as flat as it's usually stereotyped to be. Which is something I said on the same episode. And I agree with that because the area outside Winnipeg is actually way flatter than most of what I've seen from Saskatchewan. So it's treeless. That's the thing about Saskatchewan, is you can see really far because there's no trees at all.
It seems that
I've never
for
been.
a podcast with two Canadians in it, we're falling down on our Canada knowledge quite considerably.
Yeah. To be fair, I haven't actually spent that much time in Canada in my adult life.
Fair enough.
I have no excuse because I live right in the middle of the areas that he's complaining about. So. And so we might as well throw an upfront call to action because we never do that. So if you are one of the very small number of people that listen to this episode, why don't you give us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify? Tell your friends about our podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. All kinds of stuff so that we can hear back and get some encouragement to know that people enjoy what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. And if you have any recommendations or things you want to hear, let us know. Right in.
Yeah. Ideas for films or other things.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Considering the pretty slow response to our contest here, I think I can just sort of run this indefinitely. Like, if we get a response every few months, I'll just print up a T-shirt. So if you send in an error, I will send you a T-shirt.
Yes.
For until our podcast gets so successful that I can't afford to keep printing up T-shirts. Why not? If you find an error, tell me what size T-shirt you want, and we'll send it to you. Okay.
That sounds like a plan.
That'll be our marketing gimmick for the foreseeable future. So getting into our movie today, we watched The Beast from the Beginning of Time. Another great choice on my part.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. That was great.
Yeah. It's another, what I like to think of as 1.25ers. Ones where watching on YouTube, like within the first couple of minutes, you set the speed to 1.25 times. So you can
I tried it at
finish
1.5, but I couldn't understand them, so then I had to put it at 1.25.
That clipped sort of 1950s, 1960s style of acting doesn't respond very well to the 1.5 times speed up.
No.
Mm-hmm.
But then the one, like the normal time, is so slow. Like I put it on there, I was like, there was something I didn't hear at first, so I put it back down to normal, and they just seem to be talking like this.
There's a lot of talking.
But it's only 58 minutes long, though, so that's nice.
Feels like
I know,
a
but
lot
nothing really happens until the last 10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
So who wants to summarize this one?
I think Ross should.
I can. Yeah, I can go
he's
for
got
it.
notes.
I've got notes, but not very many actually. It didn't have a lot of action to write down. So, I mean, it looks like it was filmed on a potato. Essentially, it's like full of really weird angles and zooms and stuff. But it begins in the desert, which is clearly some cheap location shot in, I'm guessing, Southern California. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some people digging, and we meet Professor Mori. And my very second note from the film is that Professor Mori is a total douche, because he's just angry at everyone and everything all the time, and is
so
just needlessly
mean.
argumentative. Yeah, he's a real dick, especially to his assistant, who is called Randall. Yes, Randall, I think. Everyone's got very kind of American 1950s names. We've got Maury, Randall, Crawford, Ford.
Isn't there Cletus too?
Yeah, there's a Cletus, who's also known as Pug, Pug Harrison. Anyway, so they're on this dig. Maury just throws his weight around. He's clearly the head dude at the dig, and Randall runs up excited. He's very much a more kind of starry-eyed graduate student kind of person. They found something, and it's really exciting. And so Maury comes over, and they're there with their kind of hired diggers, and they kind of brush away to reveal a very exciting. Looks like a rubber glove filled with Jello, which is a mummified hand that they found sticking out of the rocks, the shale. And there's a little bit of kind of technobabble where they talk about how the strata are Cretaceous, and it's where they found some dinosaur fossils. So that means that this man must be at least 60 million years old, which is very old. And that's it. So then we kind of pan away from the expedition back to an office at the university, where we meet two other characters, John Crawford, who is, I think, the head of department, and Ford Benson, the third or fourth. Where it's left a little bit unclear whether he's the third or the fourth Ford Benson, but he seems to be some kind of benefactor to the university. His money's paying for digs and stuff. And we get a lot of really boring kind of back and forth between Crawford and Benson, which really doesn't add anything to the film. It's kind of just filler to kind of pad out some of the time. But there is, of course,
it's just Crawford. It's just Crawford making fun of nerds the whole time.
Yeah, totally. And there's all the isms in there. We've got a bit of sizeism, so they make fun of Ford Benson's weight, and he's compared to modern day people, he's absolutely normal. But this is a different, less enlightened time. We meet Elise, who's the sister of John Crawford, who's also employed as his assistant, it seems. I'm not sure what the kind of nepotism rules are at this university, but they appear to be pretty lax. And we get a bit of sexism there, so she gets called a very efficient young lady, as she is going about her paid role as his assistant. And we meet her boyfriend as well, who seems to also be part of the department, but is so forgettable I can't even remember his name if it's ever mentioned. But what I thought was quite nice and made a note of is how different the world of travel has become since the 1960s. I think Josh knows what I'm talking about. So Crawford has to go to the dig site where Maury and Randall are, and his plane is at 2:30, and they kind of very nonchalantly say, "Oh, you better get a move on." Because it's actually 2:00 and he hasn't even left the office, and his plane leaves at 2:30. I mean, as a kind of a father and a kind of family traveler, this sort of instantly kind of gave me palpitations. The idea of not leaving at least sort of 5 hours ahead of your flight today is just unconscionable. I think really, yeah. So that's it. So now I think we've been pretty much introduced to everyone that has an important part in the film. Once Crawford is ready to go and get his plane down to the site, it cuts back to the site and to Maury and Randall, who get rid of all their labourers, who are kind of local people who, it turns out, correctly are suspicious of this rubber-gloved hand, this mummy that they're digging up. They call it El Diablo, the devil, which is a bit of, I guess, what would you call it? A bit of a hint at the direction this film might go. Yeah, exactly. Foreshadowing. And we get a bit more of a talk. So they've done carbon dating, and this is less than a day since they've picked it up in the 1960s. So there's all sorts of levels of wrong there. It would have taken, weeks and probably at least, a whole finger of this mummy to date back then. They've dated it at 60 million years, which obviously isn't possible for radiocarbon. And they start talking about something called, I couldn't quite understand what they were talking about, a shaleometer. Anyone get what?
I think it's to read the shale, because they were talking about how it was in shale.
Mm-hmm.
I think they said scintillometer, and I think I think we can talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll talk about it later.
Okay.
We'll talk about radiocarbon dating later, because there's a lot to talk about.
But there's all sorts of ometers in this, just to make it sound sciencey, I think. And then they discuss this complete mummy, the 60 million year old human that's come out. It's got an abrasion on its head, which they theorize, apropos of nothing, that it was struck by lightning on the head. And, how this is going to upend everyone's idea of evolution, blah, blah, blah. But Maury suddenly does an about turn and says, well, why should we just send it to the museum? Why don't we take it and exhibit it ourselves? Like some kind of, Minnesota Iceman traveling carnival of freaks sort of thing. Randall's not keen. He doesn't want to be a carnival hawker. But Maury, being the dick that he is, basically kind of blackmails him, essentially. He finds out about the Morrison girl that he had an affair with at some other point. And that very quickly, having an affair with a woman, I mean, how outrageous for the time. And so Maury blackmails Randall into this idiotic scheme that they're going to take this mummified human on the road and make tons of cash.
Not only that, but they are going to hide it, take it to a different location, and pretend they found it somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Because this dig was under the supervision of the museum, so it would have been the museum's find, right? Mm-hmm. But at this point, if you're gonna fake the finding and show it like a carnival sideshow, why do you need a real body for that? Why don't you just why wasn't that your plan right from the beginning? Instead of getting your PhD in archaeology, just become a carnival barker, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and if they're going to fake where they dig it up, then who's going to believe that it's really 60 million years old if they're digging it up from a fake site?
The context.
Ridiculous.
Well, to be fair, where they dug it up, on top of it was just layers of what looked like just regular brick.
Yeah.
So they could just reconstruct that.
I mean, who says they've got a PhD in paleoanthropology? These guys could just be.
Yeah, I guess so.
They could have got a PhD in conning. They might just be absolute amateurs that have somehow lucked into a museum job. Anyway, we also meet the foreman of the labourers who's been listening in. He's called Pug Harrison, I think, or Henderson. And he also wants to be part of their get-rich-quick scheme. So now instead of all the tens of dollars they're going to make exhibiting this mummy being split 2 ways, it's now got to be split 3 ways. So that's great. And then it kind of cuts away to Maury and Crawford and Benson kind of arriving off the plane. It seems like they step straight off the plane and into the waiting car, which also is mind-boggling. And they talk about various stuff that's not very interesting. But it kind of pans back to the site, and there's a thunderstorm going on, which is also ominous. And then we cut to the next day, and Maury and Crawford and Benson drive in their car to the site, and they find pretty much straight away that Pug Henderson is being pitchforked to the side of a wagon, and he's very, very dead. And so there's a little bit of kind of good deduction going on here. There was only 2 of them left in the site, so immediately they think, oh well, it's probably been Randall that's done this. So they go and find him. He's just gone nuts. He's suffering from shock. He's trying to dig up and blethering about how they have to rebury the mummy. It's got to be buried again, sort of hinting very heavily that maybe this the beast from the beginning of time has come alive and gone on a murderous rampage. But anyway, again, in a sort of nod to realism, nobody believes this crazy psycho talk that the mummy from 60 million years ago has come alive, and so they very quickly shut Randall up into the local asylum, and there's a kind of a very nice kind of cutaway 1960s news desk shot where they explain that he's been found guilty of murder and put away. And so while he's there, we have, I think, Crawford and Elise's boyfriend, who's also somehow involved, I think. Am I right there, or am I wrong? I don't know. They're all interchangeable.
I had trouble telling people apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
And they're talking to the sheriff, who's could not be more stereotypically sheriff-like. He's wearing an enormous cowboy hat, talks in a southern drawl, doesn't know much about no book learning. Yeah, they have a discussion with Randall, and he explains further that it was the beast that killed Henderson, and that it came alive in the lightning, and that maybe because it was killed by lightning and preserved, that lightning could bring it back to life. And this is enough to convince one of the people that, well, maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe he didn't just kill Henderson. Anyway.
That sounds like science.
Yeah, it does sound like science, doesn't it? And then there's more discussions in Crawford's living room, I think, where again, a nice bit of kind of 1960s sexism. Elsie says, "Why don't Grace and I clear the table while you guys go and talk science?"
Yep.
I don't know who Grace is. Who is Grace? She's somebody?
I don't think we ever saw her.
No. Anyway. And then we have a discussion between Maury and Ford Benson. They have a fight while there's a storm going on outside. They're just got. I mean, what is their fight about? That he wants the mummy to go on display, or he doesn't. He wants to take it around. I don't know what they fight about, but it's basically kind of just to move the plot forward. Maury kind of gets annoyed and storms off to the museum. His plan is to kind of take his ball and go home. He's going to take the beast out of the museum. It's just sitting under a glass cage in the museum basement, it seems. This 60 million year old revelation that upends every understanding of evolution and man's place in the universe.
No temperature control, no humidity control, nothing.
It's just put in the basement. Anyway, so he's there. The storm that had started earlier is still going on. We hear lightning, and then very Amdram fashion, the beast kind of breaks out of his glass display case by just sort of moving it slightly out of the way so he can get out. And then he comes through, and Maury's like, "Is that you, Crawford? Ford?" All the names of people that we've met in the film, he shouts out. But no, it's the beast, and he kills him with a filing cabinet, which is, as a ways to kill an academic, is very much on the nose. I feel the beast effortlessly picks up this cardboard filing cabinet and drops it onto Maury, and that's great because Maury's an absolute arsehole, so nobody mourns that. Yeah. But then he also manages to pull his arm right off, which is great. So Maury gets his arm completely pulled off. The beast escapes. He kills the old caretaker as well, the one that let Maury into the office, kills him as well. And then, for some reason, Crawford and Benson and Elise know to go to the museum. Again, my interest wasn't held enough that I know why that was. But they go there and they see that it's been that there's something going on. They find Maury dead with his arm ripped off, and the caretaker dead. And so they work out that obviously the beast is immensely strong to lift up the paper filing cabinet. It has like the strength from the age of reptiles. But it's okay because in a very 1960s American kind of way, they say this gun is our equalizer. I mean, yeah, okay, whatever. They have guns, of course. These university academics that they take with them when they go to the museum, and
of course
they go and they ask no questions and just shoot the beast like multiple times. But he seems to shrug them off and jumps out the window straight through the glass, which is great, and he runs off. And at this point, any kind of normal, sane person, let alone an educated person, would think, well, maybe we should go to the police, if for no other reason than that the police have lots of guns and manpower. Mm-hmm. But they say, no, let's not go to the police. Let's track him down ourselves. So the beast kind of goes on a rampage. And of course, this being 1960s America, he immediately stumbles upon a parked car with two teenagers necking in it. And kind of pulls him out of the car. It looks like he's about to assault the girl before I think he gets scared off by Crawford and some of the other people that she's left, or the police turn up somehow.
Is this the scene where he actually gets shot screaming several times?
Yeah, I think so.
No.
Isn't it?
Is it? I thought he just ran away from her.
Oh, yes. Yeah, he maybe just ran away from her because he was, I don't know. So he leaves her alone, but she's shocked, and she get after having been manhandled by the beast from the beginning of time. Anyway, then the beast runs back to the museum for reasons unknown. Elise has gone to the museum now for reasons unknown, and the police are there too, and they kind of corner him and the beast in the museum, and then the police, very, I don't know what would be the correct word, very. You can cut this bit out because I'm not making any sense. But basically, the police shoot him straight away with everything they've got. All their guns, they fire at the beast. But it's not dying. Obviously, 60 million years in stone have kind of given him rock-hard abs or something. But he's not dying despite them shooting. Our weapons are ineffectual, they cry. And then Crawford has an idea. Which is possibly the best idea in the history of ever. They're in the museum. This guy's not dying. He looks over to the dinosaur skeletons and spots a stegosaur, and he grabs one of its stagomizers, which we can talk about later, and takes it over over to the beast and stabs him through the chest as he would like dispatch a vampire with a wooden stake with the stegosaur spike. And it seems, and the beast seems to finally die. And then there's a great outro, which I don't know if you guys have seen it, but is definitely made fun of in Futurama, and I'm sure other places as well, where they go, "Our modern weapons were useless against it. It could only be killed by something from its own time." And thin, and that's it. But yeah.
The human was impervious to our most powerful electronic fields, but in the end he succumbed to a harmless sharpened stick.
It's exactly that. I mean, obviously the Futurama writers have seen this film because it could not be any more of a pastiche of it. It was hilarious.
Well, at first when I saw this scene, I thought that they were doing like the whole zombie vampire thing. And I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? That's how you kill the undead.
Yeah.
But then they said that stupid line, and I was like, oh, never mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we want to start with our inaccuracies as we do?
Well, actually, to be fair, there's obviously a lot of inaccuracies in this, but a lot of the things, they said a few things that to me indicated that they at least did their homework at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So they at least, they didn't get the carbon dating right, but they did say carbon atoms deteriorating. So they at least understood the idea of it. And there was a few things that they got right. Like they said, when they were trying to say that he was, nearly human, they said, look at the location of where the spine meets the head, which is one of the indicators for bipedalism, which would be hominin. And then they were wrong in that they said, and the development of the chin, which means that it's Neanderthal. So humans are the only animals with chins. Neanderthals don't have chins. So they were wrong in what they said, but they were right in that the chin would be a diagnostic plate to look for a human.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's like they were closer to right than other movies that we've seen.
Yeah, and this was radiocarbon was cutting edge for the early 1960s. It wasn't as kind of ubiquitous and well known as it is now, and it was a very different kind of animal. Having to use a scintillometer to do it, basically having to carbonize your organic content and then use basically a Geiger counter to kind of measure the radioactivity of it. Very primitive, but it worked at the time. So
that's why they could do it around the lesion on his head, is because he was struck by lightning. So he had burnt skin. So then they were able to date that burnt skin.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about the carbon dating then, because that's what I thought he said, scintillometer, and then I had to look up scintillometer, and then Wikipedia tells me that a scintillometer is used to measure fluctuations in the refractive index of air, but it also says not to be confused with scintillation counter, which is, I guess, what you'd actually use to measure beta particles from radioactive decay. But I don't know if these words have changed since the 1960s, so maybe scintillometer would be the right thing to use, or maybe they meant to say scintillation counter. I don't know about that.
Or shaleometer, or whatever it was I thought they said.
I thought they were just making up words.
Well, I think scintillometer makes sense because it's at least similar to something you would have used at the time. But also, I had never really thought about how carbon dating was before accelerator mass spectrometry, which is what we would use today. And so I went down a whole Wikipedia rabbit hole reading about scintillation counters and how they did their early radiocarbon dating. Do you guys know anything about that?
A little bit, just that it was essentially, getting a massive, massive chunk of whatever it is you're measuring, large, and paying some poor grad student to sit and count the scintillation over a set amount of time so they could work out how radioactive it was, I think.
I read this all in 20 minutes last night, but basically that's my understanding of it too. I think it sounds like there's a few different techniques that vary slightly, but essentially they have something set up where whenever there's a particle decaying, it emits a flash of light, and you basically just sit there and count these flashes of light, and then you have to have a perfect measurement of the weight of the carbon that you're measuring, and then you can sort of find the proportion of flashes of light relative to the mass of the carbon to determine how much carbon-14 there would be out of that sample of carbon. So that is more or less correct to the way that, they would have done carbon dating at the time, which today, I feel like they wouldn't even bother explaining carbon dating. I'm sure most people have no idea how it's done, and they would just say in the movie, oh, we did the carbon dating, and then leave it at that. So it's nice to add that little bit of detail into it.
Yeah. But I mean, we've said many times on the podcast before that radiocarbon's only valid up to about 50, 60,000 years. Anything older than that, there is no radiocarbon left because it's all decayed, and it's not measurable. So 60 million years, it's not useful for radiocarbon. Fossils that are petrified,
well, he wasn't even mummified though.
Exactly.
He was just regular flesh.
There was some quite nice discussion as well with regards to mummifying about how when they dug him up, he was stiff and he had sort of muscle contractures. But then when they found him after he'd murdered Henderson, he was sort of supple and loose. And they talk about how rigor mortis had worn off or something, which I remember back from my days of forensic medicine is something that happens. So rigor mortis is not a permanent state; it's just a temporary state, and then eventually, as your kind of body decays, it kind of stops, and you go back to being kind of floppy and unrigorous,
loosey goosey.
Yes, exactly.
But my impression wasn't that they were describing rigor mortis, but that he was struck by lightning, and that's why his muscles were constricted.
Well, if you die from lightning, you will you will go through rigor mortis as well. But being struck by lightning,
yeah, but not for 60 million years.
No, that is true. They could have put in some. There's a really cool thing that happens if you get struck by lightning, which is kind of fern burning. I can't remember what the exact term is, but I will just Google it just now.
I'm sure everybody who's ever been struck by lightning thinks it's really cool.
Yeah, but what happens is you get a kind of fern leaf pattern where basically the lightning has traveled the path through your skin. I think they're kind of fractal patterns. Lichtenberg figures possibly is what they're called. But yeah, they could have shown that on him, but they didn't. And I never really got a good view of the kind of makeup of the beast. But it seemed to just be a kind of very skinny guy in a loincloth with some stuff on his face.
Yeah, he just looked kind of beat up.
It was actually the director.
Oh, really?
Really?
Yeah, he was acting under a pseudonym, but everywhere that writes about it says that it was the director who did it, who I believe was also affiliated with the local TV station. Did you guys read about the background of this movie at all?
I read a bit about all of the kind of filming was around the local TV station, and they used TV personalities in inverted commas from this local station. I guess free labor.
Not only free, so it was made by this guy who worked at the local TV station. I can't remember if he was an anchor or something else. And it seems like he just wanted to make this movie. And he's like, well, I got a TV station. So he got $10,000 from the TV station, KARD TV in Wichita, Kansas. And $10,000 from them, also supplemented by some funds from the cast and crew who contributed some of their own money to it. So not only free labor, but like
free money
supplemented. Yeah.
It's a co-op thing.
Yeah. And it's like super, obviously it's a very low budget movie. Like the lighting is terrible. The camera is sometimes at an angle, and then it zooms in and out in a way that's not very, refined. So they made it for $10,000, which is about $100,000 today, which is still among the cheapest movies that we've ever reviewed. It was all filmed locally. So you suggested it was filmed in the desert of possibly California, but it's actually filmed. Everything that's not interior is on a farm just sort of west of Wichita. And all of the interiors were filmed in the TV studio.
Wow.
Most of the actors are either employees of the TV studio or just like amateur actors. And what else was I going to say about that? I lost my train of thought.
About how cheaply it was done.
Yeah, so the other thing about it is that it was filmed in 1965, but not aired until 1981.
What?
Wow. Really?
Yeah, so I don't know why it wasn't originally aired, but in 1981, October 30th, they needed like a Halloween movie to like just fill a time slot. And so they had that. And so they aired it on the local TV station in Wichita. And for like the longest time, if you didn't see it on Halloween, on October 30th, 1981 in Wichita, Kansas, nobody would have ever seen this movie up until like very recently with the internet, where now it's available everywhere, right?
Wow.
And I think the guy who made it sort of was kind of aware of how like campy it was. So in 1981, he got somebody, he got a film critic to review it and give it a bad review because he thought he could get some like camp appeal for it and turn it into like a cult classic, which never really happened at the time.
It's not interesting enough.
No.
Yeah, it's pretty boring. So, I mean, we're pretty lucky to be doing our podcast at the time we are, because even like 10 years ago, it was really hard to find obscure movies. And now we can watch all these terrible movies really easily.
Yeah, a blessing and a curse.
So, Kim, you talked about how they described some real traits like the position of where the spine joins the skull, which is the foramen magnum. That's the hole in the bottom of the skull, which, of course, in humans points downwards, but in other animals points sort of backwards. And then they also mentioned the chin, which you said only modern humans have, and no other types of humans or any other animal has a pointy chin. And I think they called it a near Neanderthal type or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they said near Neanderthal.
But the thing about these old movies is that, you know, there's mistakes in the movies because the filmmakers didn't know what they're talking about. But in the old ones, there's mistakes because the science has moved on and we used to believe different things at the time.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm not exactly sure what we classified as Neanderthal in the 1960s, but I think the definition was broader and we didn't really have a good sense of like the different human lineages. So the idea probably would have been accepted in the 60s that Neanderthals were ancestral to modern humans rather than a sister group, a sister lineage. And so when they talked about the presence of a chin, I thought it could be like Neanderthal type transitioning to modern humans so that you have, you know, a clearly primitive looking human, but with the evidence of a chin showing like Neanderthal evolving to modern human, which maybe is
But would that make any
too
sense?
generous of an interpretation.
Yeah, would that make any sense? If you've got Neanderthals, 50,000 years ago, and modern humans 50,000 years ago, then, and you have a kind of multi-regional hypothesis where one morphs into the other, then how come 60 million years ago you have an intermediate type?
I don't think you're supposed to poke holes in it like that, Ross.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, the whole thing was that he was supposed to be... They had the dates good for what they were talking about, actually, because they said he should have been from 50 or 60,000 years ago, which is where you would find a Neanderthal. And they said they actually found him 60 million years ago, which is roughly where you would find dinosaurs. So, like, the dates for what they were saying were good, except, like, of course, it doesn't make sense, which was the whole point, right? He was totally out of place, and they said he was going to upend everything they knew about evolution. So, like, it's interesting that, like, from a movie maker perspective, they seem to understand the actual state of the science, but then when they like wrote their script, they didn't bother to make the script make any sense. They're just like, oh yeah, we'll put this plausible Neanderthal 60 million years ago and say that it doesn't make any sense. And then they never had an explanation for that. He just went, like, they abandoned that whole plot. He just went on a rampage killing everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't need to be from 60 million years.
And he never even has a reason for killing them.
No, that either. But he didn't necessarily hunt them like in other movies either, though. He just kind of hurt some people, got in their way. It's very similar to the other movie that we watched with the
Trog?
butcher. He kills the butcher. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's similar to a lot of movies because it's not really an original story. They find a ancient human, it comes back to life, it kills everybody, and then they kill it. And there's not really much of a story to it.
No. It's also similar to Horror Express as well, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ross, why don't you tell us what a thagomizer is?
Yes. So a thagomizer is the tail spikes of a stegosaur. I know that some paleontologists like to use the term technically, and others don't, but it comes from a Gary Larson Far Side cartoon, which has a bunch of cave people attending a lecture where there's an image of a stegosaur's tail spike on the screen, and the caveman lecturer saying, and this is the thagomizer, named after the late Thag Simmons. And because that part of the stegosaur tail didn't have a technical name at the time, I think that the paleontology community kind of embraced the thagomizer and used it in technical publications, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, it's fun. I appreciated how the skeleton was very, very clearly just ceramic or wood or something too.
Yeah, it looked like the cheapest paper mache or something.
Another thing that we could talk about, there's just sort of a single line early on when they're trying to explain how they could find this well-preserved human. One of the scientists said that he was some sort of primitive man, nothing out of the ordinary, though. Mummies are being excavated in this part of the Southwest every day from Indian burial mounds. And so that's based on, I think, sort of combinations of truth. Because certainly there are mummies that are found in the American Southwest where it's dry and like amenable to mummification. But Indian burial mounds, I don't know about mounds from the Southwest, but the mounds, like there's the mound builder culture, which extends sort of from the Mississippi eastward to the Appalachians. And there's like lots of burials that were found in the mounds. Which wouldn't have been mummified, though. They would have been skeletonized because they were buried in a climate that wasn't amenable to mummification. So have we talked about the mound builders before?
No, I don't think so.
I mean, it's pretty tangential to the movie we're watching, but it's the whole mound builder thing is really interesting. So like there was this culture of, or like multiple cultures over thousands of years, basically along the Mississippi River and its tributaries that built all kinds of different mounds for different reasons. And they built, like, in some places, huge cities made up of different types of mounds, the largest of which is Cahokia outside of St. Louis, where there were, like, over 100 mounds. And, like, the main one at the center was basically a step pyramid made out of dirt. And a lot of people aren't aware of like the mound builder culture. Like Cahokia at the time, around the year 1300, would have been one of the largest cities in the world, like with tens of thousands of people living in it.
Wow.
But the real reason the mound builder thing is so interesting is because of the way that it's like sort of buried in American consciousness. Like in the 1800s, when people were moving west, they started finding these ancient mounds, which were largely abandoned at the time. And in the last few places where people were still living there, the people were starting to be wiped out by smallpox before the settlers started arriving. So even if people had been still living in these mound cities, by the time settlers got there, they weren't anymore. They were all gone. And so people started to speculate who built these mounds, and they just couldn't fathom that indigenous people could have built them because, you know, in their mind, they were too primitive to build cities. And so they were speculating about like literally anybody in the world. It could be the Vikings or the Mayans or the lost tribes of Israel, which is actually what the Mormon church believes, or the Book of Mormon teaches to this day. Or even like giants. There's still people talking about how giants built the pyramids, which ties into that sort of carnival sideshow thing, because we have like the Cardiff giant, and I can't remember, the San Diego giant or something like that. These frauds that people created to suggest that giants used to live and that they had either gone extinct or otherwise turned to stone or something like that.
Yeah.
But like the thing about the mound builders is that it was, you know, entrenched into politics that native people couldn't have built the mounds, and therefore that justified the American westward expansion and extermination of indigenous people. So it's something that I like to talk about as much as possible because, I mean, it's still part of, you know, that genocide of indigenous people in North America that's ongoing.
I mean, it's a common trope, isn't it? And it's not just seen with indigenous people in America, but you look at like discussions of things like Great Zimbabwe, discussions of I don't know, pretty much any megalithic site outside of the UK. Essentially, you know, you never hear these kind of issues come up with regards to Stonehenge or with regards to the megalithic sites in
or even the
Europe.
mounds of the Beaker people.
Yeah, exactly. Which kind of, you know, immediately tells you that these kind of ideas are often steeped in racist assumptions about what is primitive and what is not.
Well, it's been a few episodes now that we haven't mentioned Grant Hamilton and ancient aliens, so I guess it's about time they come up again.
Yeah.
For anybody interested in the contest, send me the name Graham Hancock to our email, and I'll send you a T-shirt.
Right. I knew I was getting it wrong, but then you guys didn't say anything, and I was like, oh, I got it right.
Oh dear.
I refuse to learn his name.
That's it. Just mispronounce it every time. I think that's the best thing you can do.
On the podcast, it's probably not aliens. They call him Gramcock, if that helps you remember.
Nice.
Just call him that.
Yeah.
Just call him that.
Yeah. Gramcock. Yeah.
Or Han Gramcock. Just mix it up. It'd be interesting.
One error that's like just so like common that I think we tend to not even pay attention anymore is that they found a Neanderthal in America, which even if he was from the regular time of 50 to 60,000 years as they expected, there are no Neanderthals in the Americas so far that we know of. Although I did see a discussion, people talking about the Cerruti Mastodon site on the Bigfoot subreddit last night. So people, I guess, are still aware of that whole thing.
Uh-huh. I think that's your own fault for hanging out on a Bigfoot subreddit, I've got to say.
So, where do we stand on the Cerruti Mastodon site? Nobody has ever believed that was a real site except the authors, or is there any credibility to it?
I think possibly. I mean, it's a real site, isn't it? It's just
it's a real
the
site
dating.
in the sense that it has mastodon bones.
Yeah.
Is it real? Is it a real site in terms of human evidence, though?
Yeah.
Because I wasn't aware that the dating was bad, but the evidence that humans were actually there was the problem.
I don't
So
think
for listeners who
yeah.
don't know, it's a site in California where there are smashed mastodon bones and unaltered stones that have sort of damage marks on them. And it's dated to 130,000 years. So the authors suggest that humans were using the stones as hammers to smash open the mastodon bones to get at the marrow. But there are no modified tools. There's just stones with damage marks and smashed mastodon bones. And even if it wasn't, even if the date wasn't crazy for human occupation of the Americas, that would still be pretty tangential evidence, I feel, to indicate that humans were actually involved in that process.
Yeah, that's too big of a claim to make based on that type of evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, the same thing that smashed the bones could have smashed the rocks, right? Correlation doesn't mean causation.
The bulldozers that were building the highway where they found the mastodon bones.
Yeah. Or other mastodons as well. I mean, we know that elephants, if they encounter the bones of other elephants, then they kind of pick them up and touch them and move them around. If they, if something stood on them while the stone was on the top,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So we don't have anything else to say. I mean, Cerruti Mastodon site doesn't really matter because the skeleton isn't 50 or 60,000, or the preserved human isn't 50 or 60,000 years. He's 60 million years old, so it's a moot point anyway. He was already out of place. Doesn't really matter if he's in Africa or Europe or the Americas if he's 60 million years, because the 60 million years is the interesting part of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of outplaced in several ways. A, that it's Neanderthal. B, that it's at that time site. I mean, we could apply Occam's razor to these kind of scenarios to minimize the numbers of issues and suggest that maybe European Neanderthals invented time travel and sent one of their own back 60 million years. Yeah,
they just keep getting killed.
So the interesting thing about this movie is if human remains were found that were securely dated to 60 million years, that would upend a lot of what we know. And what would happen if that actually happened? If we found human remains that were securely dated to 60 million years, what do you think would happen in the field?
I think we'd have to start looking into physics, into whatever the Rick and Morty thing is, the multiple dimensions or planes of existence. And
yeah. I mean, it's definitely something that people have been talking about for a long time. So Haldane, JBS Haldane, famous evolutionary biologist, when he was asked about what would it take for you to disbelieve or to abandon the idea of evolution by natural selection, his response was often Precambrian rabbits. So the idea that if something was so completely out of the accepted time frame that we'd have to rethink everything. But in 200 years since the first dinosaur was found, and so far that hasn't happened. Apart from some of the things that you might find on a Bigfoot subreddit, like these out of place artifacts that come up, but tend to often be just misinterpretations of things that are quite well understood.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to shoot off, guys, because I've got something to do at 1:00. But if you guys want to continue talking, that's fine by me. I will send over the Audacity in a minute or two.
I have to catch a plane in 8 hours, so I'm going to try and go to bed.
You better get a move on. It's not the 1960s.
So we can close it off there. Final thoughts about this movie. Low budget. Probably would have been okay if it was lost to time.
The Neanderthal Man and, was it Trog? Yeah, those are both more entertaining than this one.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. But this one is the oldest, although not aired as the oldest. No, the Neanderthal Man was older. That was right. That one's from the 50s. This one's from 1965, but it's in black and white. It feels 10 years older than it is.
Yeah. I was hoping that there would be some gems in it, like the stupidity is the cornerstone of your existence, but it did not provide.
Yeah, it's felt like it was going to be fruitful like that in that early scene where they were in the office with the dinosaur silhouettes on the poster behind him, but we didn't really get anything great.
I know.
There was one little thing where he was talking to the guy in the chair, and I can't remember what he said. The guy in the chair was asking if what somebody else thought of him, and the other guy mentioned something about his physique, and he's like, "What do you mean by that?" And he's like, "Oh, nothing. Have another drink." If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.